Hey class, welcome. Professor Pronte here, and today's video is on consumer and producer surplus. This is going to be the first of a couple videos on this topic, and the goals here for this first one are to explain what is consumer surplus, what is producer surplus, why do we care about it, what's it used for in other words, and how can we find it when just looking at one hypothetical transaction. All right, so let's get to it. When activity takes place in a market, right, it's going to generate something called consumer surplus for the buyer and producer surplus for the seller. So what is that? Conceptually, this is a measure of well-being, right, welfare. This is a very theoretical thing rather than something concrete that we've been talking about with earlier models. When people buy something, they get some benefit from it. The consumer surplus is our measure of that benefit that the buyer is getting from the activity. Likewise, the producer surplus is a measure of welfare or well-being for the person selling the good. All right. This is going to get clearer once we get into some numerical examples here. For a definition for you, though, for consumer surplus, right, we're looking at that difference between the price that someone pays for a good and the price that they're willing to pay. Right? A lot of times when we buy stuff, you're able to get that product, right? Acquire that good at a price that's lower than the absolute most you'd be willing to pay. There's lots of examples of this, and many of them, there's lots of coronavirus examples of consumer surplus right now. I'm going out these days shopping, and there's all sorts of things that I just buy on site. Stuff like rice, toilet paper, all sorts of canned soup. If I see that stuff, I'm getting it, right? And so as a buyer then, there's a big difference between the price that I'm paying for those things versus the highest price that I would be willing to pay, right? I paid 20 bucks for some toilet paper. Things are getting dire at the Pronte household right now. So if I see it, I'm going to buy that stuff right now. Even if the price is high, I would buy it. But they're not charging high prices. The prices are much lower. And so that difference between the highest price that I'm willing to pay and the price that we actually pay is called consumer surplus. Okay. When sellers sell a good, they likewise experience some surplus. And here it's kind of the opposite of what we were just talking about. When sellers are selling something, there's a minimum price that they're willing to accept. Right? Anything less than that, they can't do it. They have a bottom line. This is the lowest price at which they would be willing to sell something. Oftentimes, though, they're able to sell it for some price that's higher than that. And so for a seller, that difference between the price that they receive and the lowest price that they're willing to take is called producer surplus. Right? And so that's what we want to learn how to measure and to learn how to identify in working with these problems here. Those definitions I'll link in the description here in the module as well, so you don't need to rush to write those down. All right. So that's a general description of what consumer and producer surplus are. I think we get some more clarity, though, when looking at a real-world transaction. And so I always like to rely here for these ideas on an exchange that I had, I don't know, maybe a couple years ago. And so I'm going to share the details of this transaction with you guys. A couple years ago, I sold a car. My wife and I had a Hyundai Sonata that we were driving for a number of years. We got this car when we were much younger, and it was reliable for us, and it was okay, but I don't know, it wasn't very much fun. We were happy to sell this thing just last year. All right, and so my job was to sell the car. I put this thing on Craigslist, trying to get some offers. I asked for $3,000. And my wife laughed at me and said, there's no way we're going to get $3,000 for this car. And so I left it out there for a little while, and at first it seemed as though she was right. We weren't getting any offers. I was starting to get nervous. And so in addition to offering that car for sale on Craigslist, I also went to Carmacks. And if you ever sold a car at Carmacks, you'll know that you can get an offer really quick, just like that. But the offers are not really that generous. If you need to sell a car quickly, you can sell it there, but they're not going to pay you all that well for it. So I took the car down there to Carmacks. They gave me an offer of $500. So I wasn't very happy about that. But I had that sort of in my back pocket as a backup, right? So my process was, well, I'm going to leave this ad up on Craigslist shooting for $3,000. But if I can't get that, then I've still got this $500 that I can sell the car at Carmacks. Okay. And so that went on for a week or so, and I finally got a call. This guy came out, he wanted to buy the car, and in negotiating with him, he had seen that $3,000 advertised price on Craigslist. He didn't know that I had the $500 offer from Carmacks. And so negotiating with this person, right, I had the $500 as a backup. I was shooting for something higher than that. We ended up coming to a price of $1,800. And so I want to use that transaction, all the long story here, to use that transaction for our example of consumer and producer surplus. Okay, so I'm going to scoot out of the way so you can see my numbers here a little bit. All right, so on the board here, I have represented the $1,800. That was the price that we actually negotiated to. That's what I got from him for selling this car. However, the lowest price that I would have taken from him was $500 or higher, right? Anything above that, I'm coming out ahead. So my rock bottom lowest price that I would have taken is $500 or $501, if you will, right? And so I sold it for $1,800, some price. The lowest price that I would have taken was something lower than that. And so that difference between what I got when I sold it and what I would have been willing to accept is producer surplus. A lot of times you'll just see it abbreviated here as PS. So I got some producer surplus there. I was really stoked about this. I felt great. I got producer surplus of $1,300. And so these numbers here I can say are definitely accurate because I was, of course, the seller in this transaction. I'm going to make some assumptions here about that person I was dealing with, his willingness to pay, right? The ad posted the price there of $3,000, so I'm guessing he would have been willing to pay something similar to that. Let's call it $3,000. Let's say that's the absolute highest he would be willing to pay. But he didn't end up paying that. We went back and forth, and we came to this price of $1,800. So just like I received some producer surplus when I sold the good, the person buying the good is getting consumer surplus. If he would have been willing to pay $3,000, but only had to pay $1,800, that difference is consumer surplus of $1,200. All right. So there you go. I think that's exactly how you do it for just one transaction, calculating consumer and producer surplus. In our next video, what we want to do to build on this is to look at how we can find the consumer and producer surplus from an entire market, right? Not just one car being sold, but instead from the market for gasoline or the market for soybeans or something like that. And so you'll be able to see graphically that market provision of a good actually maximizes this total surplus, our consumer and producer surplus together. So there you go, a little preview of our next one. I'll see you guys in the next video.